There are two words usually translated as sin in the Bible. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word is chata. In the New Testament, the Greek word is hamartia. The Hebrew word is an archery term, meaning to miss the target. The Greek word similarly is a javelin throwing term, which also means to miss the target. Both of them carry an implication of unintentionality. That is, it's understood that what happened was not what was intended to happen by the person who did it. In the Greek text in particular, the only time you really see this word rendered as sin is in translations of biblical or religious texts. In all other texts, this word is rendered as error or flaw or mistake, and in ancient Greek, this is the actual meaning and usage of the word. Sin, as we understand the word in modern English, can be either intentional or unintentional, and frequently is synonymous with guilt, shame, evil, and wrongdoing. Hamartia wasn't necessarily intentional, and really just didn't carry any meaning of intentionality. It could just as easily mean a wrong answer on a test, a misfire, a malfunction, or an erroneous idea. In ancient Greek drama, hamartia was the fatal flaw of the protagonist, be it pride or even loyalty. It didn't matter if the quality would be considered positive or negative. It was simply whatever flaw, whatever attribute of that person, it would eventually bring them down. The well-known Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex typifies this concept. But every time you see the word sin in your Bible, understand that the better and more accurate translation is error, mistake, or for the purposes of this discussion, malfunction, or even possible dysfunction. The Apostle Paul makes two very interesting statements about hamartia. In his letter to the Romans, chapter 5, he describes it as hereditary, every human being inheriting it from our common ancestor. In chapter 7, he describes it as being located in the flesh. The Greek word used here is sarx, which literally means the flesh of one's body, that is, skin, muscle, organs, blood vessels, and so on. Between these two statements, Paul describes this hamartia, this error, as both hereditary and physiological in nature. Hamartia has to do with a human being's behavior. The part of our flesh which governs behavior is the brain. Therefore, as Paul describes it, hamartia is not only physiological in nature, it is neurological in nature. Furthermore, Paul gives a huge clue as to what part of the brain is affected. In Galatians 5, he describes the works of the flesh as opposed to the fruit of the Spirit. I encourage you to look these up, but for the sake of time, what gives us the clue is that all of these behaviors, at their root or base cause, can be attributed to fear, aggression, and the body's craving for food or sex. These are the core survival responses, what are called in psychology the fight-flight responses. Fight, flight, fear, and sex. They are governed by the limbic system of the brain, and they are common to virtually every animal. Specifically, they are governed by the hypothalamus in the brain, which significantly also governs childbirth. But the part of this system which acts as the gatekeeper for the hypothalamus is the amygdala. In nearly all other animals, this system activates to deal with physical threats and to ensure the survival of that animal, as well as ensure that animal's genes get passed on. Except in human beings, the amygdala doesn't just light up for physical threats. It activates this system for psychological threats as well. It activates for perceived threats to one's self-identity. It even appears to activate when a person simply doesn't like something, or when they do. Consider a very small child for whom good is defined as whatever makes them happy, and bad is defined as whatever makes them unhappy. They can easily treat a food they don't like as a mortal threat, or a food they do like as a survival necessity and scream until they get it. All of this is being governed by the human amygdala, applying whatever survival response it deems appropriate to the situation. Is it a threat or is it a necessity? And it treats everything the human being encounters one way or the other from birth. The human amygdala is not like the amygdala of other primates. This was demonstrated in a recent study and comparison of the human amygdala with the amygdala of chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and monkeys. The human amygdala is 4 times larger than that of our closest genetic cousins. This is significant because while the human brain is generally larger than a chimpanzee's, it is otherwise proportionately identical in most ways. Furthermore, when the structures of the amygdala were compared, it was found that the human amygdala was structured very differently from all of the other primates, and those differences were much more pronounced than, say, the differences between a chimpanzee and a gorilla. It isn't a stretch to suggest that something happened in human evolution to cause the modern human amygdala to deviate significantly from those of our closest genetic relatives. The Bible gives its own account of what happened in Genesis chapter 3. This is the very familiar story of Adam and Eve and how Eve was tempted and took the fruit, ate it, gave it to her husband, and ate it. And they ate fruit from a tree that they were warned not to eat from. While it may be difficult to believe that eating a certain kind of fruit can cause this kind of change in the brain and pass that change on to offspring, there are a number of compounds that can cause birth defects, mutations, and changes to offspring if ingested while pregnant, and even if ingested by the parent prior to copulation. For this reason, it's entirely plausible that there was a compound found in a piece of fruit which could do this. It is also a clue that the first thing which the account states that our ancestors felt was bad, that is, a threat, was that they were naked. Every animal on earth up to that point was naked. It was normal. Yet for whatever reason, they no longer saw it as normal, but as a psychological threat, and they reacted accordingly. It's also not a stretch to suggest that most psychiatric disorders can be, at their base, attributed to one or more of these survival responses, gatekept by the amygdala activating inappropriately to surrounding circumstances, the memory of a threat, or an imagined threat. In all animals, the amygdala was intended to activate, deal with the threat, and then shut down the response system once the threat was dealt with. The human amygdala, however, activates this system even at the thought of a perceived threat or a perceived necessity. It has even been demonstrated to light up on a brain scan when a human being lies or tells a falsehood. I should also mention, too, that it has also been noted in studies that human beings are naturally hardwired for negativity. That is, human beings are constantly looking for threats and things to go wrong. We see this with doom scrolling. We see this with being hooked on negative news. We're always interpreting things in light of whether or not it's a threat or a necessity. In comparison with all other animals, the human amygdala can be considered to be malfunctioning or dysfunctional. It is an organ of the brain which is trying to perform its original function, but because of the structural changes which have occurred over the course of our evolution, rather than protecting the person and ensuring survival, it can and does actually cause more harm because it is faulty and fails to shut down properly when the physical threat, feeding need, or sexual need is passed. This is the hamartia, the malfunction, which Paul describes in Romans and is the cause of the murders, thefts, lies, rapes, lack of self-control, drug abuse, angry outbursts, schisms, factions, and so on, which we see. It's the root cause of our human concept and experience of morality, the idea that some things are good and some things are bad. Again, those things that we usually believe are good are those things that we see as personal necessities to our own survival, one way or the other. Or at least the brain sees it that way. Those things that we see as bad, almost without exception, or without exception, are those things that somehow we feel threaten us. Hamartia is not a moral failure. It's not guilt, it's not intentional wrongdoing, and it's certainly not a spiritual problem, as many pastors and theologians seem to try to make it out to be. It is a faulty piece of a human brain becoming so overprotective that it can actually cause intense amounts of harm, both to others and to oneself.